Round 6 of the FIDE Candidates 2020 tournament is in the books, and the biggest story continues to be Russian superstar Jan Nepomniachtchi, who won again today and moves to +3, but he's not the biggest story because of his dominant performance. He's now also the biggest story because he was coughing extensively at the press conference after the game and said that he doesn't feel that great. So we'll see what this means for the tournament moving forward, but if you look at the critical position on the board today, Ding Liren missed a brilliant computer line to save the game and half a point to slow down the Russian superstar. But before we get into that, let's back things up to move 1 for a second. So the 2 times so far that Ding Liren has had the black pieces, he's been faced with a Ruy Lopez. And nobody is challenging Ding Liren in his Marshall. Marshall is early lines, black plays d5. So Jan opts for 6d3, which is one of the many setups that you can take against the Ruy Lopez. We're not going to get into the crazy intricacies of the Spanish. We would much rather focus on the middle game, but b5, bishop b3, d6, and now white can choose a plethora of different setups, but Jan goes for a3, keeping a little square here for his bishop, and knight c3, bishop g5 will be his idea to fight for the central square on d5. After castles, knight c3, knight a5, bishop comes back, black goes for a light squared bishop trade, and white plays b4, takes on a2, rook a2, knight c6, and bishop g5. Once again, we see this being the middle game strategy. You'd like to trade your dark squared bishop for the knight, you'd like to secure the outpost on d5 for your knight, and maybe play c4. Now, this isn't some sort of brilliant new development. Actually, Ding Liren has had this position 2 times with the black pieces already. So the logic here is that Jan is playing into something that he thinks Ding will find comfortable, but the risk that he's taking is that maybe Ding reviewed these positions an hour before the game. But maybe Ding reviewed them months ago, and he just said, all right, I'm comfortable with them, let me focus on things that I might not be so comfortable with. And so after queen d7, we see, obviously, Jan go for this idea, but perhaps Ding could have considered a move like knight d7, trading the bishops, not trading the bishop for the knight, and then this will allow him to at least fight for the d5 square with his knight, or maybe with his c-pawn, or maybe with a knight on d7. Another idea is to go knight g4, but Ding played this in the past, and he goes for it once again, and after knight d5, a5, all things that Ding has played, by the way, in the past against MVL, for example, rook b2. This is the first novelty, the first unfamiliar move potentially for Ding, and we saw it take an effect on him immediately. Jan had a 30-minute time advantage right around this moment in the game, and he said that after the move c4, knight d4, quick trade, and queen c2, that he simply did not believe that this position could be bad for white, and he also didn't think that it could be equal. He did mention that an engine might say this is about in the balance, given the material equality and the fact that the knight on d5 is good, but doesn't have any obvious targets, but in the long run, the doubled pawns on the d-file, the pawn majority that white has, and the ability to kind of crack things open at any moment with c5, cb5, maybe f4, f5, f6, starting some sort of attack, it gives white all the options in the position. So Jan continued to press Ding throughout the middle game on the clock, making solid improving moves, and forcing Ding to make concrete changes to the position. So for example, after rook e8, g3, just a solid improving move, here Ding decided to play b takes c4, making a critical change to the position, and queen c4. With pressure on d4, pressure on c7, and the long-term idea to march the b-pawn down the board, let's really keep in mind that if these pawns get traded, black is left with doubled isolated d-pawns. He's going to have targets in the center throughout the game, and if you trade the c-pawn, the knight on d5 will live forever. It cannot be targeted by the dark squared bishop, and it cannot be targeted by the rooks, unless, of course, you sacrifice material. So, Nepo said in his post-game thoughts that he just thought this position was very easy to play for white, and if it wasn't just very clearly better, he would find a way to press it forward no matter what. So Ding plays c6, obviously the only way to go is knight f4, trying to create counterplay here, get the trade, knight e2, and the principled response is to strike back in the center, because really, if you don't do anything, I'm going to win your d-pawn, and then I'm going to go for c6 as well. I'll play f4 to kick your bishop out. Your bishop will have to return to the passive diagonal back here. So after d5, ed5, cd5, and queen b3, we again get to a position where it's really not so clear what Ding Liren should be doing. His bishop is standing pretty on g5, but that's basically its only job. It doesn't have any targets along the dark squared diagonal. It controls some empty squares. He's got two isolated pawns stuck together in the center, which will just be easy targets. Knight d4 might not be possible right away due to bishop f6, but in the long run, defending these is going to be difficult. Not to mention that white literally just has a passed pawn that he can push all the way to b7. More on that later, but this pawn can just go to the end of the board and just be held down by the Alekhines battery with the two rooks and the queen. So white's got all the cards to play for in this position, and Ding here goes for a move that we have seen throughout this event and really throughout top-level Grandmaster games ever since AlphaZero burst onto the scene, the Google supercomputer. When in doubt, play h5. Just do it. We saw Anish do it to Ding Liren, now we see Ding Liren doing it to Yan. Yan did it yesterday to Wang Hao. h7, h5, or, excuse me, h2 to h4 has been seen a lot throughout this event. Oh, Yan says I'm not particularly interested. Okay, so Ding continues to push. Yan continues to push. Ding continues to push. And, you know, it seems like he can't make any more progress with this pawn, but the reason he did this was to disallow the king an escape square and create some light squared weaknesses here for white, you know, with evil intentions such as this. Yan plays a nice move, king h1, a prophylactic idea, keeping knight g1 as an option to guard the f3 square as well as put pressure on h3 and kind of keep the queen glued to the defense of this pawn. Now we see Ding Liren change his focus to the pressure here. Maybe he's got bishop d8 on his mind or blockading the pawn on b7, because Ding would much rather have this pawn on b6 than on b7. At least if it stays on b6, the bishop on d8 will always pressure it. Whereas if the pawn makes it to b7, the bishop has no role in targeting that pawn. We see rook fb1, bishop d8, and now the first attempt at simplification for Yan. If he gets the queens off the board, he is just very easily winning. The pressure of the b-pawn will be strong enough to maintain paralysis of all the pieces that black has, and the rook on b5, not to mention the knight on d4, will simply scoop up these two pawns, and it will be a very easy win. So Ding goes for counterplay. He goes queen g4, with pressure on the knight, not to mention just the very deliberate threat of mate in 2. And so here, Yan can do a handful of things. He can take the d5 pawn and secure control of f3. He can go all in with the check on e8, take on f7, that also guards f3, but it might leave b6 a little bit vulnerable given all the tactics, or he can go for knight g1. Yan thought for a while and played queen takes d5. Computers seem to like the queen e8 variation, where you win the f7 pawn and give up b6 due to tactical reasons. For example, you cannot go for this because of rook a1, knight g1, rook takes g1, and you lose. And we see the full power now of the pawn on h3, excuse me, and the king cannot escape. But what white should do there is just not to take the bishop. Just play f3, or knight f4, or knight g1, and you're fine. And due to all of the pawn weaknesses, not to mention the fact that the king is very vulnerable on h7, white has a winning position according to the computer. But queen takes d5 is the engine's second choice, and I'm only presenting this just to show you that it really is complicated. It's very easy to sit on your couch or gaming chair or floor or, I don't know, wherever you are at home and say, Yan missed the winning move. No, queen d5 is the human move. You take the pawn, you maintain central power here with the queen in all directions, and you guard mate, and Yan did a very practical thing. But this was Ding's idea. You take my pawn on d5, you cannot take my rook, because once again, you need to maintain control of this diagonal. And here, Yan should have opted for f3, deflecting kind of the danger of his own queen to black's queen. And after something like this, this is simply a winning endgame because of knight f4, pressure on d4, and the fact that black does have to blockade the pawn on b7, because allowing it to get there would be fatal. But Yan played queen c6. And I'm assuming that after rook c5, which is what happened in the game, he saw that, you know, he was fine. But what he had missed, and this might look like deja vu because this is the position that we started with, what both players missed here is that at this moment in particular, black can take on b6. Rook takes b6. And it looks ridiculous because after rook b6, let's say black takes back on b6, the pressure here and the back rank problem is all thwarted with the move knight g1. And now, if something like bishop a7, queen e8, f7 is falling, not to mention that any moment in the future, you can trade the queen once the king comes out to h7. The king is safeguarded, you'll win another pawn, and you'll just be winning in this position. Slowly, but you will be winning. But the beautiful line here is as follows. Queen takes e2. Which looks unplayable because after rook b8, you have no way of guarding the bishop, and it's coming with check. So to a human, this looks completely lost. Because not to mention that after check, there is queen e4. Well, and queen e4 obviously would be trading the queen. But here there is a brilliancy. And that brilliancy is rook e5. You allow the bishop to be taken with check. But now, the threat of queen e1, as well as the lingering diagonal problem, makes this position savable for black. And after something like rook h8, queen c8, queen h3 check, king g1 is the only real way to stop yourself from either having queen f3 as a problem or queen f2. We get to this position, and after something like this, black is safe. Black has equalized material, and black will most likely hold the game. Those of you sitting at home are probably like, I would lose this with white or with black. That's fine, but that's why we watch the candidates, and we can make safe assumptions about their games at this moment. But neither player saw this variation, sadly. This absolute brilliancy with rook e5, and it was so brilliant that Jan Nepomniachtchi said after in his press conference that if you find this idea that you should most likely be disqualified from the tournament. I should also say that, you know, here, instead of going for rook h8, if you play something like rook g1, then an incredible quiet move, queen f2, with threats of rook e2 and rook e1, make this position extremely dangerous for white. There is no check that can save you here, and you'll have to revert back to something like this. Queen a8, rook e1, and settling for some sort of position like this where actually you lose instead of making a draw because you do not have another check. Every check that you have is guarded by some sort of piece, so that would actually be losing. And because Ding missed this chance and continued to deflect, Jan played queen e8, knight g1, and it's a worse nightmare situation for Ding, who has run out of threats on white's king, and simultaneously will be losing more material in the future, and the b-pawn will survive. And faced with this very difficult decision, computer here, you plug it in, let it think long enough, suggest moves like queen f5, maintaining this, pressuring this, attacking d3, defending f7, but slowly but surely white will win, boosted by the fact that his pawn will be standing on b7 without any particular danger. Ding here opted, this very nice defensive move, to sacrifice material and go all in on the back rank, but he is one move too short. When you have a winning position, everybody, you can do one of two things. Number one is simplify the position, transition it to a winning endgame, and number two is use your material advantage to create a winning attack. In this case, because white is so passive, he has to go for number one, and he can get simplification here by force. Trading the queens, and after queen h4, pawn takes, rook d1, Jan doesn't even go for passive defense with rook b3. He allows his pawn to be taken, with the idea being that he will win back h3, and you cannot take the second pawn due to the fork of the king and the rook. If you cannot take that pawn, white will simply guard it, and even though you have doubled h-pawns and not a very pretty pawn structure, 3 versus 3 with an extra piece, it's completely lost for black. So Ding resigned after the move f3. And Jan moved to 3 wins and 3 draws, which in chess terms is considered +3, is 4.5 out of 6. Tournament is nearly halfway over, and Jan has shown peak form. He is in dominant shape. But like I said in the intro, in the post-game press conference, he was coughing. And people actually hypothesized that Ding Liren resigned and didn't want to suffer because Jan was coughing excessively throughout the game. So we'll see what happens. Will the tournament be postponed? Jan joins Alexander Grishuk in being very vocal in his thoughts about the tournament, saying that the playing environment is kind of hostile. A lot of security guards around the hotel and the venue are in masks, a lot of spectators as well. Should the tournament have been postponed to begin with, without even the first move ever being played? Will we see the tournament paused and played again in a couple of weeks or maybe months? I don't know. But what I do know is that Chess.com live coverage, as well as Game of the Day recap, is happening on an ongoing basis as long as the players are still playing. And if you've missed any of our other videos or our live streams, you can catch them right here. You can catch them anywhere you catch your chess recaps on social media, our live streaming platform as well. Subscribe to the channel to make sure you know when next videos are going to be coming out. And we will see you after round 7. Stay tuned.